Norwegian-American linguist Einar Haugen that Babel was a blessing. So being invited to a conference that is called Celebrating Linguistic Diversity, and a conference that attracts so many dedicated teachers, is a great honor. In addition, I'm an admirer and a friend of Jim Cummins, and to be able to talk at a conference organized to honor his work is a privilege. I'm not the only Norwegian that have been inspired by Jim Cummins and his work. Jim has come to Norway many times, and also to my university college in southern Norway. And delegations from my institutions have also come to Toronto to visit with Jim and his colleagues here. When in Norway, Jim has given several keynotes at conferences. And here is at one of them, a conference where the majority in the audience were teachers. Jim has a great respect for the work that teachers do, and he has a unique ability to communicate with teachers. So concepts and perspectives from his work are known and appreciated by teachers all over Norway. Some of them have met him or heard him at conferences, and many have met his ideas in college, in lectures, and in books and articles they have read. So concepts and terms like Bix and Kalp, the threshold hypotheses, the double dual iceberg metaphor, empowerment, and so on and so forth, they have been instrumental for many Norwegian teachers in understanding what teaching students with a linguistic minority background is all about. Jim has a down-to-earth and friendly way of being, and this has been particularly appreciated by younger colleagues who are greatly surprised to find that one of the leading names on the international research scene seems to take a genuine interest in their work and their ideas. Here he is with some of them, and also with some senior colleagues, I have to admit. So, Jim has been influential in Norway, but his influence on the particular Norwegian winter sport ski jumping has been limited. Here he is on top of the Olympic ski jump in Lillehammer, and I don't know if you can see that he's not very comfortable up there. If Jim has had an impact on educational policy in Norway, this has definitely been after 1878. But 1878 is an interesting year in our context, because in that year, Norwegian Parliament voted that teaching in the common school should, to the extent possible, be conducted in the children's own language. At this time, Danish was the official language in Norway, and teachers did try, to the best of their abilities, to speak Danish-like. This was hard to understand for the students, and of course the learning outcome was in many cases inadequate. In 1915, the Parliament passed a law which said students are permitted to use their own language during oral teaching activities. The teacher should, to the extent possible, adapt his natural language form to that of the students. Well, Parliament could not possibly have been influenced by Jim Cummins on, on these two occasions, but the principles laid down are certainly reminiscent of his thinking. As you all know, Norway is located in the northern part of Europe together with Denmark, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland. And the country has a long history of being multicultural and multilingual. Well, the country has always been multicultural and multilingual, most evidently because of the presence of the indigenous minority, the Sami people. But over the past 2 or 3 decades, the diversity of Norway has become even more salient due to immigration. Today, close to 15% of the population belong to what we call the immigrant population, which is defined as persons who are themselves born abroad and have immigrated to Norway, and children of immigrants. Close to 15% of the inhabitants belong to this group. In Oslo, the percentage is 31%. And within the immigrant population, the great majority are immigrants themselves. Only 17% are children of immigrants. If we turn to school, we see that we don't have an exact figure for the percentage of immigrant students on the national level, but 19% is a reasonable estimate. In Oslo, it's 40%. So we're getting close to Toronto, aren't we? With the growing immigrant population, Norway has been confronted with some big questions concerning multilingualism, multiculturalism, and education. Here are some of them. Are linguistically and culturally diverse students basically an enrichment or a problem for schools? Are there, on the whole, reasons to claim that these students as a group have special circumstances and needs? How can the fundamental educational values of social justice and empowerment be granted to students who come to school with a linguistic and cultural background different from the majority? Is being bilingual a potential educational resource, or an impediment to school success? Should the language background and the cultural background of the students play any role in the educational offered to them? What should be the aims and content of the teaching of the students' L2, and how should it be organized? My contention is that Jim Cummins has been influential for the debate about these questions in Norway, both for the academic debate and for the political debate. These two arenas are not separate when we're dealing with questions concerning multiculturalism, multilingualism, and education. On the contrary, they are intimately intertwined. And I'll show you an example. To the question, are linguistically and culturally diverse students basically an enrichment or a problem for schools? Political documents are replete with positive answers. A year ago, there was a debate in Parliament in Norway about the new policy for integration called a comprehensive integration policy. And here are 2 quotes from the debate. Diversity and multilingualism are resources for the Norwegian society and should be valued during the educational career of the students. The committee majority, all except the members from the Progressive Party, considers immigration and diversity as a strength for the Norwegian society. and the policy document was adapted with votes from all other parties except the Progressive Party. Let's go a few months into the year and come to November 2013. Here's an article in Norway's leading national paper. 7 out of 10 Norwegian Pakistani children need extra language help. Almost all Norwegian Pakistani children are born in Norway. Nevertheless, most of them are too weak in Norwegian to follow the regular teaching in school. One thing to say about this is that it's not particularly surprising that students with Urdu as their first language need extended language support in Norwegian. As we know from Jim Cummins' work from Edmonton in the late 70s and the beginning of the 80s, it can take many years for students to become competent in the context-reduced and cognitively demanding language of school, and this is, of course, particularly the case when the language of instruction is not your first language. But here is the reaction to this article by one of the members of parliament who a few months before had been supporting statements like the ones you just saw. Jan Bøhler, AP, is afraid that mother tongue at home makes the children less susceptible to succeed. The idea that one should learn Norwegian via the mother tongue does not function, says the leader of the Oslo Labour Party. How can one value, or at least declare that one values, diversity and multilingualism as resources, and at the same time say that parents should stop communicating with their children in their own language? We notice that this politician does not have any critical remarks directed towards school. It's all directed toward the family. Jim Cummins has written about blaming the victim in cases like this. And by the way, a recent study by the Norwegian Statistics, or Statistics Norway, shows that there may not be that much reason to panic. Pakistani children, or these are immigrants, not born in Norway, immigrants, they do better than many other groups, and they are not that far behind the Norwegian-speaking majority. I don't say that everything is as it should be in the Oslo school. On the contrary, many things need to be changed as far as I'm concerned. But we should keep our heads cool and look at the facts and not jump to hastily conclusions. This also goes for researchers. Here is the reactions to the article about Norwegian Pakistani children needing extended language support from a researcher in special education at the University of Oslo. Disturbing, bilingual children face greater challenges than previously thought, says Professor Monica Lervåg. She is a professor of special education at the University of Oslo, and their research shows that bilinguals have weaker comprehension of the school language than monolingual children. The distinction is not reduced when the children get older. It is disturbing, especially given the large portion of minority students in the Oslo schools, says Melby Lervåg. We have used a wide range of reading and learning tests and compared with the development of the monolinguals. The good news is that it is possible to do something if you put in your efforts early enough, says Melby Lervåg. According to research, systematic and intensive language training in kindergarten helps. I don't have, well, it's not far-fetched to interpret these statements as bilingualism being the main problem and intensive vocabulary training in L2 being the only solution. I don't have detailed information on how this training is done in practice, but I have to confess that programs like Head Start and No Child Left Behind easily come to my mind. A warning from Jim Cummins and his colleagues is in place here. It is hard to argue that you are teaching the whole child when school policy dictates that students should leave their language and culture at the schoolhouse door. Luckily, there are teachers in many schools and kindergartens in Norway who teach bilingual children as whole persons, trying to help them to develop all their linguistic resources and to foster linguistic joy and interest. One of my colleagues at Hedmark University College, Gunhild Tomter Alstad, is going to defend her doctoral thesis in a few months. It's entitled, in English translation, Preschool as Second Language Learning Environment, a case study of 3 preschool teachers' second language teaching practices. The focus of this study is on Heidi. Heidi is in her mid-40s. She has a genuine interest in languages, and she's eager to stimulate a similar interest in her students. 25 of them. And her work with language is integrated into all daily situations and activities. 25% of the children in her institution are bi or multilingual, and they have Norwegian as their second language. There's no personnel in this kindergarten who speak the language of the children. And Heidi herself has very limited competence, or practically no competence, in the languages in question. But this does not prevent her from integrating these languages in her work with the children. And she encouraged them to use their whole linguistic repertoire. Here are the principles that Gunhild has identified in her study that are underneath or behind the teaching practices of Heidi. Improvised, flexible, and not but and systematic work with language stimulation. This is quite far from the intensive separate vocabulary training in L2. Give children rich language experiences through different forms of play, songs, rhymes, oral reading, conversations, drama, etc. Bring children into more context-reduced and cognitively demanding verbal communication. Here's where how Gunhild places Heidi's teaching practices in Jim Cummins' famous quadrant. This is Gunhild. This is Heidi. Back to the principles. Include a variety of languages and language varieties. Show appreciation for all children's cognitive, linguistic, and cultural background, and cherish multilingualism both in the group and in individuals. Heidi's teaching practices remind us about methods for work in complex language situations developed here in Canada by Jim Cummins and his colleagues in close cooperation with teachers in schools. I'm thinking of things like the dual language books, identity text, etc. Of course, Heidi's children don't write, but they tell stories, they sing songs, they make drawings. Gunhild never asked Heidi if she knows Jim Cummins and his work, models and theories. She might well do because she reads professional journals and books. And in any case, Gunhild needs Jim Cummins to describe and analyze Heidi's educational practice. There are 98 references to Jim Cummins in the thesis. So as you can see, even if some politicians and researchers seem to have quite different answers to the question, the big question I mentioned, than those that we can find in Jim Cummins's reading, writing, and thinking, there are teachers, researchers, teacher educators whose thinking and practices are very much in line with Jim's ideas. Jim, you may not have very much to teach us about ski jumping. But when it comes to the challenges and opportunities for school and education in modern linguistically complex language learning situations, we are still listening to you. In 1942, President Roosevelt made a speech where he said, "Look to Norway." Today, when we're trying to find new models and new principles to respond to the ever-changing situation for linguistic minority students in Norway, we look to Canada. We look to Toronto, to OIC, and to Jim and his colleagues at OIC and in the schools. And they very much inspire us to fight for social justice and empowerment of all students in our schools. Thank you very much.